So today we're here to talk about what makes a good argument in an English literature essay. And this might be slightly different based on your other joint honors subjects, but specifically for English literature, I have some tips and tricks to help you uh, work your way through what makes a good argument at a higher education level. So first of all, what is an argument? We should start maybe with the basics. An argument is your close, nuanced interpretation of a text. What are they saying and how are they saying it? How are they using things like genre and form and different literary techniques? How are they engaging with the theory that we've studied? And how are you answering the question that your lecturers are asking you in the assignment spec? Uh, Things that an argument isn't is just interesting. So this text is interesting because that's not an argument. Anything could be interesting. That's very subjective. You can't really back that up with evidence from the text. That's your opinion, not your academic reading. If you're doing a comparative essay, saying this book is similar to this book because any two things could be similar if you stretch enough, or dissimilar if you stretch enough. So that again, that's not really an argument. Focus on something really specific. It's also not the overt surface level message of the text. We want you to dig a little deeper beyond just, sort of what's the message. I mean, that's a sort of basic level that anyone reading this could get. We want to know what you think a little bit more deeply about that. And it's not plot summary. You should never really have plot summary in any of your essays for English literature, because the assumption is if I have assigned these texts, we're all on the same page. We all know roughly what happened. So just save your word count, avoid plot summary entirely. A good argument does answer the question, and it answers it in the introductory paragraph. That's really important, preferably, as I say, in the first sentence of your introduction, because the introduction of your essay is the blueprint for the rest of your essay. You're going to tell us in that first sentence, this is overall what I'm arguing. And then you're going to give a couple of examples, about how you're going to prove that. And then you'll spend the bulk of the essay out with the introduction, proving it, giving us your evidence and your close readings. You'd be surprised how many essays I get that don't actually answer the question. A good argument also doesn't just repeat the question. So if I say, what does this book say about gender? I get a lot of essays that say, this book has a lot to say about gender. I'm going to discuss that over the course of this essay. That's not an argument. I have no idea what your specific reading of this text is. You haven't said, what do they say about gender? You're not telling us how. So what we're really looking for is the what and the how and the why, the digging deeper. Your argument is backed up by evidence. So I think one of the best tips I can give you is if there's a question that you like that you want to answer, there's a text that you think would be really good to answer it, read that text or watch that text more than once. Because that way you can really dig in and find that evidence to back it up. And often doing that is going to shape your argument and make it a little bit more nuanced. So the first time you read or watch a text, you're often there just for the plot. That's fine. We all do it. I do it myself. But then you can watch it again and get those details that are really going to hone that argument. That's where you find the patterns that can make your argument a lot more specific. And again, the best piece of advice I can give you is go really small with your argument. Aim for something very narrow, very niche, some tiny little detail or some tiny little pattern. The smaller you go with your arguments, the better your close readings will be, because you're going to have to dig a lot deeper. You can have a lot more targeted research as well. So the two best undergraduate essays I've ever read, one was on Robinson Crusoe, and the question they were asked was, how does Robinson Crusoe deal with issues of imperialism and land? And the student focused only on patterns to do with shrubbery and bushes on Robinson Crusoe's island, and how that dealt with the Enclosures Act and how that dealt with land ownership. And it was just a very clever, sort of very, very niche reading of that text. The other example I often give a student at Aston wrote an essay about queerness and the talented Mr. Ripley. And rather than exploring, it's an overtly queer text, rather than exploring these broad things that they could talk about, they focused on how queerness was sort of closeted or overt based on what characters were wearing on their necks. So neckties and scarves and turtlenecks and things like that, and how that sort of represented different stages in coming out. And so very savvy, very niche little details that they've picked up on from reading or watching these texts more than once. So that's an example of a good argument. A bad argument just gives us the sort of overt message of the text. So, in A Christmas Carol, the I argue that Dickens is saying that money can't buy happiness. Well, that's not really an argument. That's just the overt message of the tale. So avoid that. Try to give us something more, something that is more specific to you and something that you've noticed. Also, a bad argument is often really broad. So this is sort of the flip side of what I said in the last slide, which is going narrow with it. A bad argument just covers too many topics. So, this essay, I'm going to talk about, gender. That's a bold claim. Keep in mind that the word count often sets the limit for your topic. So if it's only a 1,500 or 2,000 word essay, you're doing yourself and the topic a real disservice by picking something this broad. So the smaller you go with it, the more chance you actually will have to do it justice and really get into the research and really give us some good examples. And if we go back to my video on how not to generalize in an essay, a lot of bad arguments are often based on generalizations. Oh, this medieval poem shows that everyone was super religious, and everyone was scared to not believe in whatever. Again, how do you know that? That's an argument that's built on sand, so avoid doing that. So I have a couple of examples here. A bad argument, Shakespeare's sonnet, My Mistress' Eyes, is about an ugly lady who he loves anyway. That's the overt message. That's just sort of the plot. That's what happens in it. And then you can see, I have a much more nuanced version of that deals with things like form and genre. A bad example, Twilight and the Hunger Games are similar because they're both sci-fi fantasy and have interesting love triangles. We get a couple of 2 for 1 here. Interesting, subjective. That's a word you should strike from your vocabulary. It has no meaning in an academic context. Nothing is ever interesting in academia, quote unquote interesting. And they're both similar because, well, I mean, there are hundreds of texts out there who are sci-fi fantasy with love triangles in it. So again, that doesn't mean anything. Another bad example, Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings are 2 fantasy series that both deal with religion and religious imagery. Okay, that's getting better and a little bit more specific, but what are they saying about religion and religious imagery, and why? How are they doing that? You got to give us that, how and why. So you can go back and read my examples here. This is something that you'll get the hang of, I'm sure, as you do more of these. But if you have any questions, please give me an email at any time.